started on this journey at the role, how was the reception? Was there a lot of readiness to get started, or did you have to work to build up this vision for transformation? How did it pan out for you?
Yeah, this was sort of a nervous conversation I had with the dean. I said, what if I go out there and I offer my services and nobody wants this? But I literally went to every team, every group of faculty in the business school. I introduced myself and I explained what my role is going to be about, and I did it in a very humble way to say, I'm a resource. I had a little presentation on what changes are coming and so forth. And to many, this was new. They hadn't really thought about this. And I said, whenever you're ready, whenever you want to talk about, let's discuss it. And then we created, which I think was very smart, sort of a mechanism of scarcity, that we said, in the first wave, there's going to be 3 courses that will be reviewed. And if you want to be one of those courses, you can sort of raise your hand and go to the dean and get permission. And, instead of saying who wants to do it, we basically got more people than 3. And once the first people went through that review, they shared back with others how much benefit they had gotten out of it, sort of the before and after. And that created a dynamic of buy-in. And then when we started the leadership series, that's really when a much broader audience, the summer series on digital transformation, that's when a much broader audience heard about this and had an opportunity to interact with it. But I would say the real moment of truth is coming right now, working with the chancellor, the provost, the deans of all the colleges in the university on this vision, building a vision for the future. And that is a super exciting process. I've done visioning work throughout my career, and it can get very messy, very ugly. So I developed a methodology, I call it dimensional visioning, where we first identify through interviews what are the relevant dimensions of change. And then we create a spectrum of reasonable options on each dimension. And then we go through a survey process, and then we collectively and collaboratively discuss those results. And that's a very powerful process because it doesn't force anything on an individual. It does not allow people to sort of grandstand with their individual views, but it sort of collectively shapes step by step the views. It takes into account the various stakeholders, and it also allows us to engage audiences that typically might not be heard, such as the students or partners from the community who can be involved in that process.
Sure. No, that sounds very interesting. And I can relate to that even in the corporate world, right? That idea of building that change is really important. Maybe we can step back a little. Let's look at what's going on. A lot happened in 2020. A lot is happening in 2021 because of the pandemic. A lot of things changed. How do you see the big picture of what are the challenges or opportunities when it comes to digital vis-a-vis higher education, right?
Yes, and I will sort of disclose my primary source for sort of what's new in the world and what are updates in 2020. I do that every year in the last few years, is to go to CES Las Vegas. And I'm sure there's other conferences that you can go to, but I always find it fascinating to be exposed through so many topics, so many technologies, and get the pattern there. And this year they had a really good track on higher education. And then I think about it and I do more research around it. And I think what everyone was so focused on in 2020 in response to the pandemic was creating that balance between in-person learning, online learning, and then creating maybe hybrid formats. It seemed that in itself was a revolution. And in many aspects it was, because the entire faculty, the entire administration, everybody had to sort of learn to deal with this in a very short amount of time. And it felt like, sort of advancing into the future at a much higher speed than originally anticipated. But if you take that step back that you just talked about, and you look at what is happening sort of on the fringes of the bigger education picture, there's a few developments that really say we have to look much, much bigger. The experience economy is coming. It's coming everywhere, but it's also coming to higher education. It's going to be driven by some new technologies, augmented reality, virtual reality, but also by the ability to sort of curate learning experiences in entirely new ways. Hollywood meets higher education. Somebody coined that phrase, and that's very real. In some cases, this experience may manifest itself in unexpected ways. For example, in games, learning through games, or invisible learning, as some people call it. If you think about the deep immersion, if you play a game like Assassin's Creed, and you are in Paris, of medieval Paris, or you are back in Egypt, the environment is so immersive, and you can enrich that environment with learning opportunities. You can literally, see the original design of the Cheops pyramid, or learn about Notre Dame. So this is going to be a huge challenge to higher education, because the gaming industry already has all of these experience capabilities, and all they have to do is in-source the content. And higher education has sort of owns the content domain, but most institutions have very little experience how to package that in a way that becomes suitable for that level of consumption. So it's going to be really interesting to see if there will be collaborations, or if the gaming industry is going to take a huge bite out of the education industry in the future. And then we have, in a separate field, a shift of learning. I think everybody has to be in the business of learning. We as individuals have to further advance ourselves. That's what I've been doing for the last 3 to 4 years. And many businesses are finding that their partners in higher education don't have the speed and the flexibility to adapt to these new demands as quickly as they would like to see. Google, for example, had huge demand on entry-level IT staff, and they just couldn't source it in the market. They couldn't find anyone who could train their people fast enough. So they created a 3 to 6 month program under the umbrella of Grow with Google, and it has become the #1 course on Coursera. Not only are people taking this course to qualify themselves for Google, but it's now almost like a standard in the industry. If you can say, I've gone through that course, so I would be good enough now to get an entry-level job at Google, well, then I should be good enough to get an entry-level job almost anywhere. So 400,000 people have already completed that. Google is expanding that now to other domains, such as project management. And you could just imagine how this, the label of I am Google certified, or I have an IBM badge. IBM has created over 2,200 badges and has issued more than 3 million of that. That may be the equivalent of maybe the old days, when you took a leadership course at Harvard University and it was the thing. Maybe, business-based education is going to be really big. So there are multiple challenges that coming the way of higher education institutions.
Sure. Would you like to share some examples with our audience of some things you may have seen? Maybe quickly, maybe 30 seconds each, if you can.
Yeah, happy to do that. Again, these are some examples from presentations at CES, and the links are at the bottom. So one company that is entering the education market is Shell Games. So their bread and butter is games. And they created, for example, this virtual lab, right? So you can put on your virtual reality glasses and you can now practice without having to touch actual chemicals. You can practice how to operate in a lab with all the security requirements and how to mix different chemicals. It's not any real risk. And so, this is sort of entry-level chemistry, but they've also gone into a different area, history. The History Maker VR, where you can actually slip into the role of key historical figures, and you can then record a video, how they basically share some of their story. And these are just examples where you are immersing yourself into this environment or into a role, and you are learning by immersion. It doesn't feel like, you have to read 20 pages and then you have to take a test. You're just having fun going through the different stages of those games. And I think that's what the gaming industry is just so good about, keeping people engaged, always making sure they go to the next level and they want to continue. So maybe this ability to get people addicted is going to be a really good thing when we can use that addiction for becoming addicted to educational content. Different category, creating a learning environment. This is, the example is spatial. So, we are obviously now in a webinar here in a Zoom environment, but we have some limitations on what we can do from an interactive point of view. Spatial wants to take this to a whole new level. And in principle, they're designing this in sort of a new reality, virtual reality, augmented reality. They're adding tools such as, notes that you can post, that you can move around. You can see the other conversation partners in a holographic projection. And, then a good counter to that would be, well, but not everybody has virtual reality technology available to them. So they thought about that and made it inclusive and offer it on a multitude of platforms so you can enjoy it in virtual reality, augmented reality, but also on a two-dimensional representation on your phone or on your screen. And so this is going to be another example how online learning is going to go to the next level, and the modalities and the experiences are just going to be much more advanced. So this is a little bit more info on that organization. And then a last tool, maybe, again, everybody had to scramble in 2020 to sort of get their classes online. And I think the big winners were Zoom and Microsoft Teams. And one of the co-founders of Coursera actually sort of looked at that and observed how his daughters were learning and sometimes not really learning even while being in a Zoom meeting. And they redesigned this whole experience and created Engagely. Engagely is in principle also an online platform, but one of the things it does is it actually measures many indicators of student engagement. How many questions are they asking? What are they looking at? How are they interacting with others in the chat? What are they doing research-wise? And is feeding that back to the teacher. So you basically get a review of the engagement of your class, and you can react to that. So this is going to be another version of future online learning, not just relying on pushing content through the pipe, but creating an understanding of class success or predictors of class success and making that visible through technology. That may even be superior to in-person learning, because even in the classroom, you can't observe and record everything that is going on. So I think this is going to be a really powerful tool going forward.
Yeah. Question for you. What are some of the key obstacles do you see that you foresee institutions having as they're getting started on this journey? And what are some of the key recommendations you would have?
Yeah, this is one of the big discussions we're having now with the leadership at UWGB. The biggest for many institutions is that historically, so much of their business model was built around brick and mortar. You've got all of these buildings, these halls, you've got the dorms, and there's millions and millions of dollars inside of these halls. The classrooms are configured in a certain way. And I think historically the mentality was, how do we get a return on that asset? So we can't just walk away from it. That would not be very easy. So as long as the mindset is built around brick and mortar and the business model, I think that's going to be a challenge for institutions. Another really interesting thought is that many institutions have historically defined excellence as an exclusion measure, right? So if you had 100,000 applicants and you only admitted 5,000, right, then you had a huge 95% rejection rate. And some institutions held that up to say, look how elite we are. We have the highest rejection rate. And, in order to get in here, you have to really be the best of the best. And I think we need to switch that mindset. I asked a pointed question early in my tenure. I was with a group of leaders, and I said, how many students do we currently have? And it was 8,000. And I said, what would it take to serve 100,000 students? And there was sort of an uncomfortable chuckle, like, yes, that was a joke, right? But I wasn't joking. It's just that the profile of students tomorrow will be completely different. Many of them will come to acquire an additional skill, not to take a 4-year degree. And so the numbers can explode, and that doesn't mean that the capacity of the university overall explodes. So we have to think about, how can we be more inclusive? How do we reach a much larger percentage of our community with education offers, rather than defining ourselves through the exclusion of that community? And then, the academic mindset, publish or perish, still sort of sits there. Faculty has to think about, what's my next research effort? How do I get published? And sometimes that closes the view for partner or perish. Local businesses don't care about how many publications you have, or that you're working on your next publication. How can you help them accomplish some of their needs, and how can you involve them? Maybe building a bridge between students and local businesses, creating new internships, apprenticeship models, teaching models for very experienced members. So there has to be another mindset on the side of the faculty to welcome the assets that live in the local community into the school. The fourth one is shortage of instructional design and experiential curation capabilities. So if this whole experience economy is coming, but most of our faculty have been hired for their content capability, then how do we actually take them from, being somewhat good about relaying that content to being excellent in relaying that content, or embedding that content in experiences? I don't think we can ask that of our faculty per se. We need to give them resources that they can work with. And many schools have a very small number of instructional designers, and they may not have anybody who actually already has the skills of creating these new technology-based experiences. And therein lies sort of a broader challenge. One of the big discussions at CES was to disaggregate the cost of education. We always just hear about tuition is too high, and what are the sources of that? And one of the surprising facts to me was that if you really adjust the cost of teaching for inflation, it hasn't gone up that dramatically, but the administrative costs surrounding that has really gone up dramatically for many schools. So as schools look to their digital future, one of the questions is, where do you digitize first? Is it the content? Is it the way it's being taught? Or do you maybe start at the administrative side? And technology is perfect for taking out expenses, improving processes. And I believe that's an area where you actually have quite a bit of expertise. So I would sort of turn the table here and say, what are you actually seeing on that front? Are you seeing schools, educational institutions that are already moving on this?
Yeah, I'll take, I know in the interest of time, I'll go and just give a quick overview on what we're seeing in the market. One thing I think we've all noticed is most of our user groups, whether they are employees in a company or students, are moving to conversational interfaces. This is a big trend. My kids here just like to text with each other. They talk to Alexa. You've seen this trend happen everywhere. And that's coupled with communication tools like we were talking about, the rise of Teams. It's a big trend, right? The students are in there. My 2 kids here in the house, they are on Teams all day long. And this is a trend that's exploded in the last year. And those are 2 permanent shifts that we see in the population, especially the younger demographic, very relevant to the student audience. What we do see is, but when you actually get to support and to preserve the innocence, but this is a public page from one of the university's student support page, right? And by the way, we saw dozens of pages like this. It's extremely fragmented. There's many different options. You go here, you go there. During morning, you go here. Evening, you go there. This is driving administrative expenses up, right? It's fragmented. People are not self-servicing. They're calling too much. And they're getting frustrated in the process. You go there to get IT problems solved, but if you're a new student, you have a questions, you go somewhere else. If I'm a faculty, maybe I have a different support model. All of that we think is eventually, this fragmented model is going to get replaced by something like Teams becoming the core kind of unified mechanism to deliver administrative services to the organization, in whether it's in an area like help desk or onboarding or access to surveys and questions. You bring that automation through Teams to your population, and that gives a very high ROI in terms of administrative cost reduction. We've seen this in many our clients where they were able to get north of 30-40% savings done in some of these administrative processes. And you unify the experience. So not only are you saving on the cost, but now you have unified a lot of these administrative services to be delivered through Teams to your faculty, to your students in a very consistent way. So it improves the experience and makes it conversational the way the next generation expects it to be, while at the same time it reduces your administrative expense by 30-40%. I think this is a shift that's only going to accelerate over the next couple of years, Oliver, based on what we're seeing and all the people that we're talking to. I think this trend is started last year. We're seeing it accelerate this year in a really big way. Your help desk will move to Teams. Some of the micro learning will move to Teams. So while you were talking about instruction design, the traditional learning formats might be there for big courses, but for smaller, quick learnings, people are even experimenting with conversational learning, and our platform, certainly we're powering that, and a lot of people are beginning to take advantage of that. So really exciting time from my perspective, and hopefully what you said about organizations getting serious about their administrative efficiency, I think is going to be will allow them to then invest in instruction design and digitization that is really important to the future.
Right. Yeah, it becomes a sort of a self-funding mechanism. If you can get the savings on the admin side, you can reinvest it on the educational side.
That's right. That's how we're seeing it. That you move your dollars from nobody ever wants to spend a penny more doing password resets in the organization, right? It's just completely non-value added activity. You take that and then you shift that dollar into hiring a better instruction design person or getting a new platform. I think that is really the shift we're seeing as well. Mm-hmm. We'll take any questions if there are any, or I know we're almost out of time, so maybe we'll take questions in an offline model. I guess we'll because we're over time, we'll wrap the session today. But if there's any participant questions, we'll follow up with people individually offline. Thank you everyone for joining, and hope you enjoyed the conversation with Oliver and I. We'll share the recording and we'll continue the conversation in other mediums.
Thanks everyone.